Okay, so you have these two fruits, and which one is prettier? I think the answer is easy. I think the answer is not driven by fashion, is not socially constructed, as some people say. I think it's obvious why we all prefer this one. Well, there's natural selection and there is sexual selection that goes into evolution and shapes very much of what we consider beautiful. Okay, the environments or fruits or people that we find attractive are those that are somehow subliminally, it doesn't have to be in a practical way in our everyday life, connected with survival and continuation of the species. Now, beauty in the past was thought to be a currency only valid for humans. Dobzhansky, a great figure in biology, said, sensitivity to beauty and making or doing things that are perceived as beautiful are among the traits that elevate man above the brutes. And yet, look at this. Not so much the case. And also, look at this. I don't know if you know about bowerbirds. They create these nests which they decorate with various colorful items they find, even plastic cups these days. And they even structure them in the way that creates perspective distortions to make the nest look bigger and more attractive to the opposite sex. So there is something into all this that goes before even humans. Okay, it's something in nature. And Anna already spoke about fractals. There is something which I like to call the geometry of nature, and much of it is fractals, is the self-repeating patterns. But as Nikos Salingaros wrote some years ago, our processing system is acutely tuned to the visual complexity of the natural environments. And fractals are an important aspect of that, but it's not, they don't cover the whole gamut of the geometry. It's also hierarchies of scales, contrasts of colors, and so on and so forth. Okay, so there is something that we can call the geometry of nature. Now, a lot of the examples I'm going to show you are comparing classical, so to speak, and modern buildings. That does not mean that the geometry of nature can only be found in classical buildings, but this is where it's been applied so far. As Peter said, as Thomas said a number of times, you can have new buildings that are built in a way that is interesting, and it doesn't have to remind you of an old building. I think it's a very good example of the situation. If you go back to Chomsky, what he was saying about language was that there is a deep structure in all languages that is common, and the different languages are surface expressions that are different. Composer Leonard Bernstein in his Harvard talks, he was claiming the same thing about tonality in music. So what I'm saying is, and this is something I argued some years ago, that we can talk about visual syntax in the same way. We can say there is a deep structure that is shared among all features, all buildings that have some features. They don't have to be stylistically the same. They can be from different countries, they can be different styles, and they can be even in new styles that we'll create. But if they share this deep structure that corresponds to this geometry of nature, as I call it, they can be interesting. And an example I like to make is grammar. You can use correct English grammar and write an infinite number of poems and novels. You don't have to write the same novels, okay? So with this introduction, I'm going to show you some results from studies. We did eye tracking studies using this software, iMotions Online. What we did is we invited people to view pairs of images at home. So we didn't have to call them in the lab, which makes participation easier. And we showed them pairs of images, the same pairs that were used in this survey by the National Civic Art Society in the States. They were promoting the idea of having classical federal buildings, but it doesn't matter. What's important is that they had many, many answers. They had like 700 people answering the surveys. And about 70% prefer the classical buildings, regardless of political orientation, ethnic origin, gender, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a partisan thing, although some people like to promote it or present it as such. It's a human thing. So look, this is the relevant paper that we published. So these are the static heat maps, like the ones you showed, from different pairs of buildings. And the color here shows the dwell time in milliseconds. Okay, so how long people spend looking at different buildings. There's also the time to first fixation in milliseconds. Okay, so there's one pair here. There's one pair there. These are the pairs as they were used for the poll. So that was a great opportunity to have results from preference studies and eye tracking side by side and compare them. Again, you can see the preference this side. We were careful to present the buildings, you know, not always the modern on one side and the classical or the other, or vice versa, to flip them so there is no preference in the on the side. Same here. So we also eye tracked other images. Like this is an image I made for an older paper. This is landscape in South Tyrol, where my base is. And on the right-hand side, I added a generic office building. And I added an image from a palace in Tehran, in Iran. So this is not about familiarity. I bet most people in Tyrol are more familiar with the generic office building than the Persian palace. And yet, look at where they're looking at. And we had actually preference data for this too. This is from an older paper. I asked people which one they find more interesting, more beautiful, makes more sense, or more familiar. And this is what I think is quite interesting. Even in the more familiar question, they found this more familiar than this or this. So they found the Persian building more familiar in the Tyrolean landscape than the modernist building. So that shows that there's something deeper. It's not stylistic. There's something deeper. Here we played with textures. We just added or removed textures from buildings. Again, you see a richer texture gives more dwell time and usually faster time to first fixation. Here, this is from two different papers. I took the Milan Cathedral and I replaced all the details with a picture from a curtain wall building, which I inverted and color adjusted to make it closer to the color of the Milan Cathedral. Okay. Obviously, these are the eye tracking data. It's obvious what people look at. This is from another paper where we used AI eye tracking simulation. This is the software, 3MVAS. What they've done is they put a bunch of eye tracking studies into AI software, and the software sort of predicts where the eyes would look, okay? And I made 3 simplified versions, and the more simplified the version is, the less the less the software predicts people will look at it, and they start looking at people because there's nothing to see. At the end, it's just a box with a curtain wall, and there's nothing to see. They just start looking for faces. Speaking of faces, this building has an opening configuration that's a bit like a face. It attracts people's eyes. This is the kitchen spoon with the face painted on it. Okay, just a rudimentary face pattern, and it makes people look at it. This is just curtain wall and a generic nature scene. So this is the cumulative slide of the data. This is the time to first fixation. You can see the different categories we used. And you see that the time to first fixation is actually shorter for the traditional, or for the rich in texture, or for the ones with fenestration and so forth, because they attract the eye first, okay? If you're looking at dwell time, in that case, there's longer dwell time. People look at more of those buildings. And the results are more significant here, because here, for the time to the first fixation, you also have, I'm sorry, can I go back? Yeah, back, like this. There's also the parameter of left-right. We have a left-to-right bias. But even despite that bias, people prefer more texture. But when you go to dwell time, there is no left-to-right bias. People just spend more time looking at the buildings that have, or the structures that have detail. And we put them all together, and these initials mean nature-like geometry and non-nature-like geometry. So we put all the data together, and I think they speak for themselves. Dwell time is significantly longer in nature-like geometry images. And okay, this is the summary, that there is availability to do this kind of eye tracking at home, which is good for two reasons. One is it's easier to recruit people to do this at home than to call them in the lab. You just have to do a kind of calibration, a few calibration slides in the beginning, and then it's done. Even psychologically, I would say it's easier to attract a wider range of people, because it's been shown that trait openness in psychology, for example, is more highly represented in people that are interested in the arts. So maybe the people that decide to come to the lab are more of a particular type. If they spend just 2 minutes at home in front of the computer, it's less effort. You know, you don't have to be so much into it to do it. And I think it's important that we show that there is a relation between eye tracking results and image preference data, because somebody might say, okay, you're looking at something, doesn't mean it's pretty, doesn't mean you like it. Maybe you're looking at it because it's hideous, and you say, oh, what is this? But that's not the case here. Now, I understand that this kind of work can have some kind of, people can have objections. I understand what late Sarah Scruton was saying, that people can get over-enthusiastic about those things and think they can replace art criticism with neuroscience. That's not what we want to do. We just want to show what's under the hood, so to say. We're not pretending to replace aesthetics with neuroscience. I don't think it takes anything out of the experience to know what's happening, as I say, under the hood. Of course, we live on the surface, but it's good to know what's happening inside. And, you know, I think it's also a newfound basis for one's self-evident, forgotten truths. People are saying that now we have progressed, and the buildings we're building now are, you know, they're modern and they correspond to what we need and all that. What we're trying to show was evident for the past 5,000 years and has been forgotten for the last 100. So we're answering those people saying that, look, we have data, modern science data, that support the view that we need all that. So we're not being backward, we're being progressive. So thank you very much. This is a book we have out this summer that may interest you, with the Happy. And thank you for your attention.